A little black girl sat alone in the rain outside a hospital. When an elderly doctor read the note her mother left, "It pains me to do this, but I can't raise her." The automatic doors of Metropolitan General Hospital slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. James Anderson stepped out into the night, his worn leather briefcase heavy in his right hand. Rain pelted the overhang above him, creating a steady drumming sound. He'd worked late again. The clock on his phone showed 11:47 p.m. "Another day done," he muttered, reaching into his coat pocket for his car keys. His fingers brushed against the photo he always carried, his daughter Emma's last school picture. He pulled his hand away quickly, not wanting those memories right now. The rain hadn't let up all day. Puddles reflected the yellow glow of the parking lot lights, and the few cars still there gleamed wet in the darkness. James had parked in his usual spot, Section C, but something made him pause before stepping out from under the overhang. A small figure sat huddled against the wall, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. In the dim light, he could make out a child's frame, dark skin, and what looked like a backpack. James frowned. "Hello," he called out, taking a few steps closer. "Are you all right?" No response. He moved closer, medical instincts kicking in. The child, a girl, he could see now, wore a pink t-shirt and jean shorts, both soaked through. Her hair was done in neat braids with colorful beads, but some had come loose. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. "I'm Dr. Anderson," he said, crouching down to her level but maintaining some distance. "Are you hurt? Where are your parents?" The girl lifted her head slightly, revealing large brown eyes filled with tears. She didn't speak, but her hand moved, clutching what looked like a piece of paper. "You must be freezing out here," James said, already shrugging off his coat. "Hey!" He held it out, not approaching further. "May I see that paper you're holding?" Her small hand trembled as she extended the paper. It was a regular notebook page, partially protected from the rain by her grip, but still damp at the edges. James took it carefully and angled it toward the light. The handwriting was rushed but legible. "To whoever finds this, it pains me to do this, but I can't raise her anymore. Her name is Sarah. She's 7 years old and has all her shots. She's a good girl. Please help her. I'm sorry." James read it twice, his throat tightening. He looked back at Sarah, who watched him with those same frightened eyes. "Sarah," he said softly. She gave a tiny nod. "How long have you been sitting here?" She swallowed hard. "Since the sun was up," she whispered. James checked his watch again. Almost 12 hours. His chest ached. "Let's get you inside and warm, okay? I'm going to call for help, but I'll stay with you. Would that be all right?" Another small nod. James pulled out his phone and dialed the hospital security desk. "This is Dr. Anderson. I need assistance at the main entrance. I found an abandoned child." "Yes, immediately." While they waited, he draped his coat over Sarah's shoulders. She clutched it tight, her small fingers gripping the fabric. "I'm hungry," she said quietly. "We'll get you something to eat," James assured her. "The cafeteria's closed, but I know where they keep the good snacks." 2 security guards emerged through the sliding doors, followed by Nancy Chen from the ER. James had worked with her for years. "Dr. Anderson," Nancy called out, then spotted Sarah. "Oh my God, she's been here all day," James said, standing. "We need to get her inside, warmed up, and checked out." Nancy nodded, already pulling out her tablet. "I'll contact social services." "It's almost midnight," James said. "They won't send anyone until morning. Protocol says." "Protocol can wait until she's warm and fed," James interrupted. He turned back to Sarah. "Ready to go inside?" Sarah stood shakily, his coat dragging on the ground behind her. Without thinking, James held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. The group headed inside, leaving the rain behind. But as they walked through the bright fluorescent halls, James couldn't shake the memory of another 7-year-old girl, one whose photo still sat in his pocket. Emma had been gone 5 years now, but sometimes the loss felt as fresh as yesterday. They settled Sarah in pediatrics, room 204. Nancy brought her dry clothes from the donation closet and a turkey sandwich from the staff room. James sat in the visitor's chair while she ate, watching her methodically tear the sandwich into small pieces before eating each one. "Dr. Anderson," Nancy said from the doorway. "A word." He stepped into the hall, leaving the door cracked open. "You should go home," she said. Security will monitor her overnight, and social services will handle it in the morning. James glanced back through the door. Sarah had finished her sandwich and was now curled up on her side, still wearing his coat despite the warm hospital blankets. "I'll stay," he said. "James, I'll stay," he repeated firmly. Nancy sighed but didn't argue. She'd known him long enough to recognize that tone. Back in the room, James settled into the chair again. Sarah watched him with those solemn eyes. "Try to sleep," he said gently. "I'll be right here. Promise." Her voice was barely audible. James thought of all the promises he'd made and broken over the years. Of the one promise to Emma he couldn't keep, no matter how hard he tried. "I promise," he said. Sarah's eyes drifted closed. Outside, the rain continued to fall. But in room 204, for the first time all day, a small girl felt safe enough to sleep. James pulled out his phone and began making notes. He'd need to adjust his schedule tomorrow. Cancel his afternoon appointments. Make some calls. The system would want to move quickly, process her, file her away. He looked at Sarah's sleeping form and remembered another hospital room, another bedside vigil. He'd been powerless then, but not this time. Morning arrived with the steady beep of hospital monitors and squeaking wheels of meal carts in the hallway. James blinked awake, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. Sarah was still asleep, curled up tight under the blankets, his coat now draped over the foot of the bed. A knock at the door made him straighten up. Nancy entered, followed by two women in business attire. "Dr. Anderson," Nancy said quietly. "Social Services is here." The taller woman stepped forward, extending her hand. "Linda Martinez, Department of Child Services. This is my colleague, Karen Webb." James stood, shaking their hands. His back protested the movement. "Has she said anything about her mother?" Linda asked, pulling out a tablet. "Nothing beyond what was in the note," James replied. "She barely spoke at all." Karen moved closer to the bed, studying Sarah. "We'll need to process her into the system immediately." "There's a group home in. She just got here," James interrupted. "She needs time to, Dr. Anderson." Linda cut in. "We appreciate your concern, but there are procedures we need to follow. Standard protocol." "To hell with protocol." The words came out sharper than he intended. Sarah stirred in her sleep. Linda's expression hardened. "Doctor, I understand this is an emotional situation, but..." The door opened again. Dr. Roberts, the hospital administrator, walked in with quick steps. "James? A word." In the hallway, Roberts didn't waste time. "What's this about you interfering with social services?" "They want to ship her off to a group home immediately," James said. "She's traumatized, exhausted, and that's for social services to handle," Roberts interrupted. "We're not equipped to keep her here indefinitely. Just give her a few days." "Let me..." "No." Roberts' tone was final. "We're not a shelter, James. You know that." Back in the room, Sarah was awake, watching the social workers with wide eyes. She clutched the blanket tight against her chest. "Good morning, Sarah," Linda said, forcing a smile. "We're here to help you." Sarah's eyes found James. The fear in them hit him like a physical blow. "Has she eaten?" Karen asked, typing on her phone. "I'll get her breakfast," James said quickly. "Sarah, what would you like? Pancakes? Toast?" "Pancakes," she whispered. "That's not necessary," Linda started, but James was already heading for the door. "I'll be right back," he called over his shoulder. Sarah watched him go, her knuckles white against the blanket. In the hallway, James leaned against the wall, his heart pounding. Emma's photo seemed to burn in his pocket. He pulled it out, looking at her smiling face. She'd been Sarah's age when they first discovered the tumor. "James?" He quickly tucked the photo away. Nancy stood nearby, concern on her face. "I know that look," she said. "What are you thinking?" "I need your help," he replied. "And I need you to not tell me I'm crazy." 30 minutes later, James returned to room 204 with a tray of pancakes and a stack of papers from his office. The social workers were still there, now joined by a hospital lawyer. "Here you go," he said, setting the tray in front of Sarah. She hadn't moved from her spot against the headboard. "Dr. Anderson," Linda began, "we've arranged transport." "Actually," James cut in, "I'd like to submit an application for emergency temporary custody." The room went silent. Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "That's not," Karen started. "I have the forms here." James held up the papers. As a licensed physician with no criminal record and a stable income, I'm qualified to. This is highly irregular, Linda interrupted. James, Robert said from the doorway. What are you doing? Giving her a chance, James replied. He turned to Linda. You can verify my credentials. Run your background checks. But until then, she stays here. Dr. Anderson, the hospital lawyer, spoke up. The liability issues alone. I'll take full responsibility, James said. And I'll sign whatever waivers you need. Sarah watched the exchange, her pancakes forgotten. A drop of syrup rolled off her fork, landing silently on the tray. Linda rubbed her temples. Even if, and that's a big if, we consider this, there would need to be a home inspection, interviews, background checks. Fine, James said. Do them. And you'd need to demonstrate adequate support systems, childcare arrangements. I can adjust my schedule. Nancy's already helping me arrange it. Robert stepped closer, lowering his voice. James, think about what you're doing. You're not thinking clearly. After Emma, this isn't about Emma, James snapped, then forced himself to take a breath. This is about Sarah. Sarah's fork clattered against the plate. Everyone turned to look at her. Where's my mom? She asked, her voice small but clear. The adults exchanged glances. James moved to sit on the edge of her bed. We don't know, he said gently. But I'd like to help take care of you, if that's okay. Would you like that? Sarah studied him for a long moment. You promised to stay, she finally said. I did. But what if you leave too? The question hung in the air. James felt the weight of every eye in the room. I won't, he said firmly. That's another promise. Linda sighed heavily. We'll need to conduct a preliminary interview. With both of you. Now? Karen asked. Now? Linda pulled up a chair. Sarah, can you tell me about yesterday? About your mom? Sarah's hands twisted in the blanket. She said we were going shopping, she whispered. But then we came here instead. Had she talked about leaving before? Sarah shook her head. She was crying a lot. 4 days. She lost a job, and the landlord kept coming. James watched as tears filled her eyes. Without thinking, he reached for the tissue box on the bedside table. Here, he said softly. Sarah took a tissue but didn't use it, just clutched it in her small fist. And what do you think about staying with Dr. Anderson? Linda asked. Sarah looked at James again. Will I have to change schools? Probably, he admitted. But we'll find you a good new one. Can I keep my backpack? Of course. Does your house have a yard? A ghost of a smile crossed James's face. A small one. And a deck with a swing. Sarah nodded slowly. Okay. Linda tapped her tablet screen. Dr. Anderson, we'll need to discuss logistics. The process, requirements, restrictions, whatever you need, James said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and questions. James signed form after form. His hand cramped, but he didn't stop. Roberts pulled him aside twice more to question his judgment. Nancy brought coffee and helped answer questions about his work schedule. By late afternoon, Linda stood with her tablet tucked under her arm. We'll schedule a home inspection for tomorrow, she said. This is highly unusual, Dr. Anderson. If anything seems off, I understand, James said. And you'll need to start childcare arrangements immediately. You can't just bring her to work with you. I've already called about family leave, James replied. I have time saved up. Linda nodded curtly. We'll be watching closely. After the social workers left, James sank into the chair beside Sarah's bed. She'd been quiet through most of the afternoon, answering questions in whispers when asked. Are you okay? He asked. Sarah picked at a loose thread on the blanket. What if she comes back? James felt his chest tighten. If she does, we'll figure it out. But right now, my job is to keep you safe. Is that all right? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so soft he almost missed it, Can I see your house now? James smiled. Let's go home. James pulled into his driveway, glancing in the rearview mirror. Sarah sat in the back seat, still wearing hospital-donated clothes, her backpack clutched tight against her chest. She hadn't spoken during the 15-minute drive. Here we are, he said, killing the engine. The house was a modest 2-story colonial, white with blue shutters. Emma had picked the color years ago. Weeds poked through the flower beds. He hadn't done much gardening lately. Sarah followed him up the walkway, her steps hesitant. James fumbled with his keys, suddenly aware of the stack of medical journals by the door and the empty coffee mug on the porch rail. "It's not much," he said, pushing the door open, "but there's plenty of space." Sarah stepped inside, her eyes taking in everything. The living room opened to the right, beige carpet, worn leather couch, TV he rarely watched. Through the archway, the kitchen's linoleum floor needed mopping. "Are you hungry?" James asked. "I could make." He opened the fridge and winced. A half-empty milk carton, some eggs, leftover takeout containers. "We'll need to go shopping. Where will I sleep?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, right. Come on. I'll show you." They climbed the stairs. James paused at the first door on the left, his hand on the knob. He hadn't opened this room in months. "This will be your room," he said, pushing the door open. Emma's room. He'd kept it exactly as she'd left it. Purple walls, butterfly decals, science fair ribbons pinned to a corkboard. The bed was still made with her favorite space-themed comforter. Sarah stood in the doorway, not entering. "We can change everything," James said quickly. "Paint the walls, get new furniture. Who lived here before?" James swallowed hard. "My daughter, Emma. She's not here anymore." Sarah looked up at him. "Did her mom leave too?" "No." James's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "She got very sick. We lost her 5 years ago. Her mother, my wife, died when Emma was very young." Sarah moved into the room slowly, touching the edge of the desk. "We'll get you your own things," James said. "Make it your space." A knock at the front door made them both jump. James checked his watch. The social worker's home inspection wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. "Stay here," he said. "I'll be right back." He opened the front door to find Nancy from the hospital, holding several shopping bags. "Thought you might need some supplies," she said, pushing past him. "Where's Sarah?" "Upstairs." "Nancy, you didn't have to, please. I have 3 daughters. I know what a 7-year-old girl needs." She started unpacking the bags on the kitchen counter. Clothes, pajamas, toothbrush, hair products, proper ones for her hair type. "James, not that 3-in-1 stuff you probably use." James felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you. There's more in my car. And I'm taking you both grocery shopping tomorrow. Your fridge is probably empty except for expired condiments." Footsteps on the stairs made them turn. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching. "Hi, Sarah," Nancy said warmly. "I brought you some things. Want to see?" Sarah moved closer, eyeing the bags. "Look," Nancy said, pulling out a pair of pink pajamas. "These should fit. And some new clothes for tomorrow. We'll get more later." "What's that?" Sarah pointed to a small bag. "Hair supplies. Has anyone helped you with your hair since yesterday?" Sarah shook her head. "Would you like me to fix it for you? I do my youngest daughter's hair all the time." Another small nod. Nancy looked at James. "Why don't you go get the rest of the bags from my car? We'll set up in the living room." James took the keys, grateful for the moment to compose himself. When he returned with more bags, Nancy had Sarah seated on the floor in front of the couch, gently undoing her braids. "You have beautiful hair," Nancy was saying. "We just need to moisturize it properly. Has your mom shown you how to take care of it?" "Sometimes," Sarah said softly. When she wasn't too tired, James set the bags down and stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. "James," Nancy called, "there's a pot roast in one of those bags. Can you manage to heat it up without burning down the kitchen?" "I'm not completely helpless," he muttered, but moved to the kitchen gratefully. As he worked, he heard Nancy's gentle voice explaining each step as she did Sarah's hair. The girl's quiet responses grew slightly more frequent. "Dr. Anderson," Sarah called suddenly. "Yes. Can I call you James?" He nearly dropped the pot. "Of course. Okay." Nancy says dinner's burning. "It is not." He rushed to the oven. "Okay. Maybe it's a little dark." A sound from the living room made him freeze. Sarah was giggling. It was small and brief, but it was the first time he'd heard her laugh. They ate at the kitchen table, Nancy carrying most of the conversation. She told stories about her daughters, asked Sarah about her favorite subjects in school, and tactfully ignored the slightly overdone edges of the roast. "I should go," Nancy said finally, checking her phone. "Early shift tomorrow." "Thank you," James said again at the door. "For everything. You're going to need help, James," she said quietly. "Don't try to do this alone." After Nancy left, James found Sarah still at the kitchen table, pushing the last piece of carrot around her plate. Ready to get ready for bed? It's been a long day. In Sarah's room, James helped her put away the new clothes. Sarah changed into the pink pajamas in the bathroom and stood uncertainly by the bed. Do you want me to take these down? James asked, gesturing to the science fair ribbons. Not yet, Sarah said. She climbed into bed, sinking into the space-themed comforter. James? Yes. What if I have bad dreams? Then you can call for me. I'm right down the hall. What if? She twisted the blanket in her hands. What if my mom comes back? James sat on the edge of the bed. If she does, we'll figure it out together. But right now, you're safe here. I promise. You promise a lot. Yes, I do. And I mean it every time. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Can you leave the hall light on? Of course. He stood. Good night, Sarah. Good night. James left the door cracked open and the hall light burning. In his own room, he sat heavily on his bed, Emma's photo in his hands. I'm trying, he whispered to the smiling face. I hope that's okay. A scream jolted him awake hours later. He rushed to Sarah's room to find her thrashing in the sheets, crying out. Sarah! He reached for her shoulders. Sarah, wake up. It's okay. You're safe. Her eyes snapped open, wild with fear. Mom! It's James. You're at my house. Remember? You're safe. Sarah burst into tears. Without thinking, James gathered her into his arms. She stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobbing. I want my mom, she cried. Why didn't she want me? James held her tighter, his own tears falling into her hair. I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know. But I want you here. I promise. They stayed that way until Sarah's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to steady breathing as she fell back asleep. James tried to lay her down, but she clutched his shirt. Don't go, she mumbled. So he stayed, his back against the headboard, Sarah curled against his chest. The hall light cast long shadows across the butterfly decals on the wall. Tomorrow would bring social workers, questions, and challenges. But for now, in this quiet moment, two broken hearts began to heal. Sarah? Time to wake up. James knocked softly on her door. 5 days had passed since that first night, and they'd fallen into a shaky morning routine. He heard rustling, then a muffled okay. In the kitchen, James poured cereal and checked his phone. 3 missed calls from the hospital. He'd taken emergency family leave, but patients still needed him. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wearing one of the outfits Nancy had bought. Her hair, which James had attempted to put into ponytails, was already coming loose. Sorry about the hair, he said. We'll ask Nancy to show me again. It's okay. Sarah sat at the table, stirring her cereal listlessly. Do I have to go? Yes. First day at your new school. Remember what we practiced? Your teacher's name is Mrs. Reynolds, Sarah recited. Room 14. And you'll pick me up at 3:15. Exactly. James checked his watch. Ready. The drive to Riverside Elementary was quiet. Sarah clutched her new backpack, also from Nancy, and stared out the window. In the drop-off line, James turned to face her. You got this. And if you need anything, call the office and they'll call you. Sarah finished. I know. She stepped out of the car, straightening her shoulders like she was walking into battle. James watched until she disappeared through the front doors. Back home, his phone rang again. Dr. Roberts. James, we need to discuss your cases. I told you, I'm taking 3 weeks of family leave. Yes. But you have patients who've been with you for years. They are asking for you specifically. James pinched the bridge of his nose. I can't just. A beep indicated another call. The social worker. I have to go. Michael. Family Services is calling. He switched lines. Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson, this is Mr. Thompson. The voice was clipped, professional. I need to conduct an unannounced home inspection. Now. That's the point of unannounced, doctor. I'm already on your street. James looked around frantically. Breakfast dishes in the sink. Laundry half-folded on the couch. Sarah's new clothes still in shopping bags by the stairs. The doorbell rang. Mr. Thompson was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a tablet tucked under his arm. He stepped inside, eyes scanning everything. You live alone? Correct. Yes. Any pets? No. Thompson made notes on his tablet. Show me Sarah's room. Upstairs, Thompson inspected everything. The closet, the bathroom, the window locks. He paused at the butterfly decals. These seem young. We're redecorating, James said quickly. Sarah's choosing new colors. More notes. And your work schedule. I'm on leave right now. After that, I'll work reduced hours. The hospital's approved it. And child key. I've enrolled her in the after-school program. Nancy Chen. She's a nurse at the hospital. Has offered to help. The same Nancy Chen who's been buying things for Sarah. James stiffened. Is that a problem? It's interesting that you're already relying heavily on outside help. I'm not. His phone rang. The school. James's stomach dropped. I need to take this. Doctor, it's Sarah's school. He answered quickly. Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson, this is Mrs. Reynolds. There's been an incident. 10 minutes later, James and Thompson walked into room 14. Sarah sat alone at a desk, head down. Another girl was across the room, surrounded by other students. Mrs. Reynolds approached them. Thank you for coming. There was an altercation during recess. Altercation? James looked at Sarah. Melissa made fun of my hair, Sarah said quietly. She said it looked stupid, that you didn't know how to do it right. And Thompson prompted. And I pushed her. She fell in the sand. James closed his eyes briefly. Violence is never acceptable, Mrs. Reynolds said. We have a zero-tolerance policy. It's her first day, James protested. She's been through trauma, which is exactly my concern, Thompson cut in. If she's already displaying aggressive behavior, I want to go home, Sarah whispered. Sarah needs stability, James said firmly. Structure. Moving her again would only, hey. A sharp voice cut through the room. They turned to see Nancy in the doorway, still in her scrubs. Sorry I'm late. Got your text. She crossed to Sarah, crouching beside her desk. Rough day? Sarah nodded, tears falling. Mind if I fix your hair? Those ponytails are looking a little rough. Another nod. Nancy pulled out supplies from her bag and began gently redoing Sarah's hair. You know, my eldest daughter got in trouble her first day at a new school too. It's scary, isn't it? Being somewhere new? They all stared at me, Sarah whispered, and laughed. That wasn't nice of them. Nancy's fingers moved skillfully through Sarah's hair. But pushing isn't nice either. Right. No. So what else could you do next time? Sarah thought for a moment. Tell a teacher. That's one good idea. What else? As they talked, James watched Thompson making more notes. Dr. Anderson, Thompson said quietly. A word. In the hallway, Thompson adjusted his glasses. This is exactly what I mean. The nurse seems to have a better handle on the situation than you do. I'm learning, James said. Sarah's learning. We both are. Children need stability, doctor. Consistency. They also need patience. And second chances. James met Thompson's eyes. Don't they? Before Thompson could respond, the door opened. Nancy emerged with Sarah, whose hair was now neatly done in 2 French braids. All set, Nancy announced. And we've talked about better ways to handle mean kids, right? Sarah nodded. I'm sorry I pushed Melissa. Mrs. Reynolds smiled slightly. Thank you, Sarah. We'll try again tomorrow. Actually, Nancy cut in. I think Sarah's had enough for today. Fresh start tomorrow. Right, James? James nodded, grateful. Right. In the parking lot, Thompson pulled James aside one last time. I'll be watching closely, Doctor. Very closely. After he left, Nancy turned to them both. Ice cream. I shouldn't reward, James started. Not a reward. Just ice cream. Sometimes a rough day needs ice cream. At the ice cream shop, Sarah poked at her chocolate sundae. James, she asked suddenly. Are they going to take me away? James nearly choked on his vanilla cone. No, absolutely not. But Mr. Thompson is just doing his job, Nancy cut in. Making sure you're safe and happy. Are you? Sarah considered this, taking a small bite of ice cream. James can't do hair. True, James admitted. And he burned the toast this morning. Also true. And he doesn't know the right songs. I'm learning. Sarah's lips twitched. But he tries really hard. Yes, he does, Nancy said softly. And he keeps his promises. James felt his throat tighten. So, Sarah swirled her spoon through the melting ice cream. I want to stay. Please. Wild horses couldn't drag you away, James said firmly. Sarah frowned. What horses? It's just a saying. It means you're stuck with this hopeless man, Nancy interrupted, grinning. Good thing you have me to teach him about hair. And songs, Sarah added. And songs, Nancy agreed. Now eat your ice cream before it becomes soup. That night, after Sarah was asleep, James sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad. He wrote out everything he needed to learn. Hair care, kid-appropriate songs, school lunch ideas, homework help strategies. His phone buzzed. A text from Nancy. You're doing fine. One day at a time. He looked at his list again, then added at the bottom, ask for help when needed. Upstairs, Sarah slept peacefully, her new braids intact, her breathing steady. On her desk, a note from Melissa sat unopened. An apology, Mrs. Reynolds had said, to be read tomorrow. James thought of Thompson's scrutiny, of Robert's pressure to return to work, of all the challenges ahead. But he also thought of Sarah's words, he keeps his promises. One day at a time, he decided. They could handle that. James woke to coughing. Harsh, deep coughing that made his doctor's instincts kick in immediately. He rushed to Sarah's room, flicking on the light. Sarah sat up in bed, her face flushed, racked with another coughing fit. Sweat matted her hair to her forehead. I don't feel good, she wheezed. James pressed his hand to her forehead. Too hot. Way too hot. How long have you been coughing? He grabbed the thermometer from the bathroom. Since bedtime. She coughed again, the sound wet and heavy. The thermometer beeped, 103.2. Okay. We're going to the hospital. James grabbed a blanket, wrapping it around her. Can you walk? Sarah tried to stand but swayed. James scooped her up without hesitation. She felt too light in his arms, burning with fever. My elephant, she mumbled, reaching for the stuffed animal Nancy had bought her. James grabbed it, already moving down the stairs. His mind raced through possibilities: pneumonia, bronchitis, severe flu. The cough sounded like fluid in the lungs. In the car, Sarah slumped against the seat, her breathing labored. James ran every red light between his house and Metropolitan General. The emergency room was quiet at 2 a.m. Nancy was working. He'd checked the schedule just yesterday. I need a gurney, he shouted, carrying Sarah through the doors. Nancy! Nancy appeared from behind a curtain, her eyes widening. Bay 3. They transferred Sarah to a bed. Her small chest heaved with each breath. Temp 103.2 at home, James reported automatically. Productive cough, shortness of breath, possible pneumonia. James, Nancy cut in gently. Let us handle it. Your dad right now, not doctor. Right, Dad. The word hit him hard. Dr. Martinez from Pediatrics arrived, ordering tests and x-rays. James paced as they worked, every cough from Sarah feeling like a physical blow. James? Sarah called weakly between coughs. Don't leave. I'm right here. He took her hand. It burned in his. The x-rays confirmed pneumonia in both lungs. Serious, but treatable. They started 4 antibiotics and oxygen. She'll need to stay for observation, Dr. Martinez said. At least a few days. James nodded, not taking his eyes off Sarah's monitors. Dr. Anderson, Martinez continued, I understand your impulse, but you need to let us treat her. You're too close. I'm fine. James. Nancy touched his arm. When did you last eat? He couldn't remember. Go to the cafeteria, she ordered. 10 minutes. I'll stay with her. But 10 minutes. She's stable. And you need to take care of yourself to take care of her. In the cafeteria, James stared at a sandwich he couldn't taste. His phone buzzed. Thompson. Dr. Anderson? We received a report about an ER admission. James gripped the phone tight. She has pneumonia. She's getting treatment. How long was she sick before you noticed? The question hit like a slap. She didn't say anything until tonight. And you didn't notice symptoms earlier? As a medical professional, she had a slight cough yesterday. I thought it was just... James stopped. Look, she's getting the care she needs now. I'll need to conduct an evaluation. First thing tomorrow. Fine. James hung up, his hand shaking. Back in Sarah's room, her fever had dropped slightly. Nancy sat beside her, telling quiet stories. The elephant helped, Nancy said, nodding to the stuffed animal tucked against Sarah's side. James? Sarah's voice was raspy. I'm sorry. For what, sweetheart? For getting sick. Please don't send me away. James's chest tightened painfully. Never. This isn't your fault. But Mr. Thompson isn't here. I am. And I promised. Remember? Sarah nodded slightly, then started coughing again. James helped her sit up, supporting her until the fit passed. Try to sleep, he said, smoothing her hair back. I'll be right here. Morning brought Thompson, his tablet ready. Walk me through what happened. James explained while Sarah slept, the monitors beeping steadily. And you didn't notice earlier symptoms because she didn't tell me she felt sick. And as her guardian, you didn't. Oh, leave him alone. Nancy appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Kids hide symptoms all the time. My youngest had appendicitis and didn't tell me for 2 days because she didn't want to miss a birthday party. Miss Chen, with all due respect. No, you listen. Nancy stepped closer. That man hasn't left her side except when I forced him to eat. He got her here immediately when he realized how sick she was. He's doing everything right. Thompson adjusted his glasses. The court requires him to provide proper care. Look around. She's getting the best care possible. Sarah stirred, coughing. James reached for her immediately, helping her drink water. Easy, he murmured. Small sips. Thompson watched the interaction, making notes. Your fever's better, James told Sarah. How's the breathing? Hurts, she whispered. I know. The medicine will help. Thompson cleared his throat. Sarah, can I ask you some questions? Sarah looked at James, who nodded encouragingly. Were you feeling sick before last night? A little. Sarah's voice was hoarse. Yesterday. Why didn't you tell Dr. Anderson? Sarah clutched her elephant tighter. Didn't want to be trouble. Mom always said. She trailed off, coughing. James helped her with the water again. What did your mom say? Thompson pressed. That being sick was expensive. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. That we couldn't afford doctors. James felt like he'd been punched. Nancy made a small sound behind him. Sarah, James said gently, you never had to worry about that with me. Ever. Being sick isn't your fault. And you'll always get the care you need. Promise. I promise. Thompson wrote something in his tablet, then stood. I'll need regular updates on her condition. After he left, Nancy squeezed James's shoulder. You're doing good, Dad. The word didn't feel so strange this time. Days passed in the rhythm of vital signs and medication schedules. James slept in the recliner beside Sarah's bed, leaving only when Nancy forced him to shower or eat. Sarah's fever broke on the 3rd day. Her breathing improved steadily. James learned to recognize the different nurses by their footsteps in the hall. On day 4, Sarah sat up, actually interested in the soup Nancy brought. Can we go home soon? She asked between careful spoonfuls. Maybe tomorrow, James said. If your x-rays look good, will you have to go back to work? Not for a while. But your patients aren't as important as you. Sarah stirred her soup. I was scared, she admitted quietly. Like when Emma was sick. James froze. They hadn't talked about Emma since that first night. How did you know about that? I heard you and Nancy talking. When you thought I was asleep. She looked up at him. Did she have pneumonia too? No. Jamesy's voice was rough. It was something else. Something the doctors couldn't fix. Did you stay with her? Like this? Every minute. Sarah nodded, as if confirming something. That's what dads do, right? James couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just nodded. That night, after Sarah was asleep, James stood at the window. The same window where, 5 years ago, he'd watched the sun rise after Emma. She's going to be fine. Nancy appeared beside him with coffee. I know. Do you? Because that look on your face says otherwise. James took the coffee but didn't drink it. I missed the symptoms, Nancy. I'm a doctor, and I'm missed. You're new at this. She's new at this. You're both learning. If something had happened. But it didn't. You got her here. You're taking care of her. Nancy smiled slightly. And she called you Dad. She did, didn't she? In her bed, Sarah mumbled something in her sleep, clutching her elephant. Her breathing was stronger now, the monitors showing steady improvement. Tomorrow, they'd go home. There would be follow-up appointments, medication schedules, Thompson's watchful eye. But right now, in this moment, James felt something he hadn't in years, like a father. 2 weeks after Sarah's hospitalization, life had settled into a comfortable routine. James sat at the kitchen table, reviewing her homework while she ate breakfast. Her cough had finally cleared up completely. Did I get them all right? Sarah asked around a mouthful of toast. Almost. James circled one math problem. Want to try this one again? The doorbell rang. Sarah jumped, dropping her toast. Expecting someone. James checked his watch. Too early for Thompson's weekly visit. He opened the door to find a woman he didn't recognize. Short, thin, with Sarah's same dark eyes. I'm here for my daughter. James felt the blood drain from his face. Behind him, a glass shattered on the kitchen floor. Mom! Sarah's voice was barely audible. Baby girl. The woman, Marie Williams, according to the note she'd left that rainy night, stepped forward. I've come to take you home. James moved instinctively between them. That's not happening. She's my daughter, who you abandoned at a hospital. Marie flinched. I had no choice. I lost my job. We were being evicted. There are always choices, James said coldly. Leaving a 7-year-old alone for 12 hours isn't one of them. James? Sarah's voice shook. What's happening? He turned to find her frozen in the kitchen doorway, fragments of broken glass around her feet. Don't move, sweetheart. There's glass. Don't call her that. Marie pushed past him. Sarah, baby, get your things. We're going home. She is home, James said firmly. And you need to leave before I call the police. I'm her mother, who legally abandoned her. I have temporary custody. Temporary? Marie spun to face him. You think they'll let you keep her? A single white man with no experience raising children. Stop it! Sarah shouted. Everyone froze. Stop fighting. She turned and ran upstairs, avoiding the glass. Her bedroom door slammed. Now look what you've done, Marie snapped. Me? You're the one who... James stopped, took a breath. You need to leave. Any contact needs to go through social services and my lawyer. You can't keep my daughter from me. Watch me. The standoff was broken by James's phone ringing. Thompson. Dr. Anderson? We've received a call from Sarah's mother. She's here now, James interrupted. At my house. A pause. Don't do anything. I'm on my way. 20 minutes later, Thompson sat in James's living room with Marie, while Nancy, who James had called in a panic, took Sarah upstairs. Ms. Williams, Thompson said, you understand that by leaving Sarah at the hospital, you legally abandoned her. I was desperate. Marie's voice cracked. But I'm better now. I found a job, a new apartment, that will all need to be verified, Thompson said. And there are procedures. She's my daughter. I gave birth to her. And then you left her alone in the rain. James cut in. Dr. Anderson, Thompson warned. Ms. Williams, if you wish to petition for custody, you'll need to. I don't need to petition for anything. She's mine. Upstairs, they heard Sarah crying. Perhaps, Thompson said carefully, we should continue this discussion at my office. All parties need to remain calm and I want to see her, Marie demanded. Now. That's not happening, James said. You can't stop me. Actually, he can. Thompson adjusted his glasses. Dr. Anderson has legal custody at this moment. Any visitation needs to be approved through proper channels. Marie stood, shaking. This isn't over. After she left, Thompson turned to James. She's already filed for custody reinstatement. James sank onto the couch. Can she do that? She's the biological mother, and if she can prove she's stabilized her situation. Thompson spread his hands. The courts tend to favor biological parents. She abandoned her child, which is why this will go to a hearing. But Dr. Anderson, Thompson leaned forward. You need to prepare yourself. And Sarah. James ran his hands through his hair. How's her case looking? She has a job at a call center. 3 months so far. A 1-bedroom apartment. No criminal record. Thompson paused. And she's her mother. That doesn't automatically make her fit to parent. No. But it carries weight with the courts. Upstairs, James found Nancy sitting outside Sarah's door. She won't come out, Nancy said softly. But she's talking to me through the door. Sarah. James knelt by the door. Can I come in? Silence. Then a quiet. Is she gone? Yes. She's gone. The door cracked open. Sarah's face was streaked with tears. Do I have to go with her? No. Not right now. But later. James met Nancy's eyes, unsure what to say. Right now, Nancy said gently, you're staying right here with James. Everything else can wait. Sarah opened the door fully and launched herself into James's arms. He held her tight, feeling her tears soak his shirt. I don't want to go, she whispered. Please don't make me go. I'll fight for you, James promised. With everything I have? That night, after Nancy left and Sarah finally fell asleep, James called his lawyer. We need everything, he said. Her abandonment, Sarah's progress here, the stability I can provide. And I want to file for permanent custody. That's a big step, James. You've only had her a few months. She's my daughter. The words came out without thought, but they felt right. His phone buzzed with a text from Thompson. Court date set. 2 weeks. James looked at the family photos now hanging in the hallway. Sarah's school picture next to Emma's. Sarah at the park, laughing on the swings. Sarah and Nancy baking cookies. Sarah falling asleep on the couch during movie night. His daughter, maybe not by birth, but by choice. By love. And he'd fight like hell to keep her. The courthouse loomed ahead, all granite and steel. Sarah clutched James's hand as they climbed the steps. She wore the blue dress Nancy had helped pick out, her hair neatly braided. Remember what we talked about? James asked softly. Sarah nodded. Tell the truth. Don't be scared. That's right. Though his own heart hammered in his chest. Nancy waited inside with Thompson and James's lawyer, Rebecca Chen, no relation to Nancy, but equally fierce in her own way. Ready? Rebecca asked. No, not even close. But James nodded. The courtroom felt too big and too small at the same time. Marie sat at the opposite table with her lawyer, wearing a new suit that still had the price tag crease lines. She tried to catch Sarah's eye. Sarah pressed closer to James. All rise. Judge Martinez entered, no relation to the hospital's Dr. Martinez, but the coincidence made James's stomach twist. Custody hearing for Sarah Williams, the judge announced. I understand the biological mother is seeking reinstatement of custody after voluntary surrender. Your Honor, Marie's lawyer stood. My client did not voluntarily surrender custody. She was in crisis and she left a 7-year-old child alone at a hospital for 12 hours, Rebecca interrupted. With nothing but a note. Counselors, Judge Martinez warned. Let's proceed in order. Ms. Williams, please take the stand. Marie walked to the witness box, smoothing her suit jacket. Ms. Williams, explain the circumstances that led to leaving your daughter at Metropolitan General. I lost my job, Marie began. We were being evicted. I couldn't feed her. Couldn't. She wiped her eyes. I was desperate. But I'm better now. I have a steady job, an apartment. I can take care of my daughter. And why did you wait 3 months to come forward? I needed to get stable first, to prove I could provide for her. By abandoning her. Rebecca stood. Ms. Williams, did you investigate any assistance programs? Women's shelters? Child welfare services? No, but did you contact any family members for help? I don't have. Did you speak to anyone at the hospital about your situation before leaving your daughter alone in the rain? Objection. Marie's lawyer called. Badgering. Sustained. Judge Martinez frowned. Ms. Chen, proceed with care. Rebecca nodded. Ms. Williams, in the 3 months before leaving Sarah, did you ever seek help from social services? No. Why not? Marie twisted her hands. I was afraid they'd take her. So instead, you left her alone at a hospital. No further questions. Marie's lawyer tried damage control, asking about her new job, her apartment, her plans for Sarah's future. But the damage was done. Dr. Anderson, Judge Martinez called. Please take the stand. James squeezed Sarah's hand before walking up. Nancy slid into his seat beside her. Dr. Anderson, you're seeking permanent custody of Sarah Williams. Yes, Your Honor. Despite no prior parenting experience and a demanding career, I've adjusted my schedule, taken leave to help her settle in. The hospital's approved a permanent reduction in my hours. At significant professional cost, Rebecca added. Tell me about Sarah's progress in your care. James sat straighter. She's thriving at her new school. Her teachers report steady improvement in both grades and social interaction. She has friends now, activities. She's taking piano lessons. And when she was hospitalized with pneumonia. Yes, the judge interrupted. I have the medical reports. You provided immediate care. He barely left her side. Thompson spoke up from his seat. Even when encouraged to step back and let others treat her. Mr. Thompson, Judge Martinez turned. As the assigned social worker, what is your assessment? Thompson stood, adjusting his glasses. Initially, I had concerns about Dr. Anderson's capability as a single father. His lack of experience, the cultural differences. He paused. But over these months, I've observed genuine dedication, adaptive parenting, and most importantly, a stable, nurturing environment. Sarah has flourished in his care. He doesn't know how to do her hair. Marie burst out. He doesn't understand, Ms. Williams, the judge warned. So he learned, Thompson continued. He sought help, built a support system, put Sarah's needs first. That's good parenting. After cross-examination, James returned to his seat. Sarah immediately grabbed his hand again. Sarah, Judge Martinez called gently. Would you come up here, please? Sarah froze. James knelt beside her. Remember, he whispered. Just tell the truth. Sarah walked to the front, looking tiny in the witness chair. Sarah, I know this is difficult, Judge Martinez said, but I need to understand how you feel about all this. Do you want to live with your mother again? Sarah glanced at Marie, then at James. I love my mom, she said quietly. Marie smiled triumphantly. But, Sarah continued, she left me. She left me alone and scared. And James? She straightened her shoulders. James found me. He stays with me when I'm sick. He helps with homework and makes sure I eat vegetables and comes to my piano recitals. He's not perfect, but he tries really hard. And he never leaves. He's not your father, Marie said. He feels like one. Sarah's voice grew stronger. He keeps his promises. Always. The judge studied her. If you had to choose, I choose James. Sarah didn't hesitate. Please don't make me leave. He's my dad now. James felt tears burning his eyes. Nancy squeezed his shoulder. After Sarah returned to her seat, the judge called a recess. In the hallway, Marie approached them. Sarah, baby, please, stay back, Rebecca warned. She's my daughter. Mom. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. You left me. You didn't even say goodbye. I didn't have a choice. There are always choices, Sarah said, echoing James's words from weeks ago. You chose to leave. I'm choosing to stay. Marie reeled back as if slapped. The bailiff called them back in. Judge Martinez sat at her bench, reviewing notes. This is not a simple case, she began. Ms. Williams, while I sympathize with your difficult circumstances, the manner in which you abandoned your daughter shows severe lack of judgment. Dr. Anderson, while your dedication is clear, this is an unusual arrangement. She looked at Sarah. However, the child's well-being must be my primary concern. I've observed marked improvement in Sarah's emotional and physical health under Dr. Anderson's care. Mr. Thompson's reports confirm a stable, nurturing environment. And most importantly, Sarah herself has expressed a clear preference. James held his breath. Therefore, I am granting permanent custody to Dr. Anderson, with provisions for supervised visitation with Ms. Williams after mandatory counseling and parenting classes. Marie burst into tears. Sarah threw herself into James's arms. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for keeping your promise. Outside the courthouse, Nancy hugged them both. Ice cream to celebrate. Ice cream. Sarah cheered. As they walked to the car, Sarah between them holding both their hands, James felt lighter than he had in months. Dad? Sarah asked. The word still gave him goosebumps. Can we get chocolate? Whatever you want, sweetheart. With extra sprinkles. Don't push it, he laughed. Sarah grinned, skipping between them. Above, the sun broke through the clouds, the first clear day in weeks. The morning after the custody hearing, James woke to the smell of something burning. He rushed downstairs to find Sarah in the kitchen, surrounded by smoke, a pan of blackened toast on the stove. I wanted to make breakfast, she said, eyes wide. Like a celebration. James opened windows while the smoke alarm blared. Maybe we stick to cereal for celebrations. Nancy says you're not much better at cooking. Nancy talks too much. But he smiled. How about we go out for breakfast instead? At the local diner, Sarah demolished a stack of chocolate chip pancakes while James sipped his coffee. Her new school ID badge read Sarah Anderson. They'd submitted the paperwork for her name change yesterday. Can we get a dog? Sarah asked suddenly. James nearly choked on his coffee. What? Tommy at school has a dog. And now that the court stuff is done, she pushed a piece of pancake around her plate. I always wanted one. A dog is a big responsibility. I'll walk it every day. And feed it? And let me think about it. Okay. Sarah's reply was interrupted by Thompson approaching their table. Dr. Anderson. Sarah. He nodded to them both. Final home visit today. Sarah tensed. James reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Just a formality, Thompson assured them. Though I hear there's talk of burning the house down. Just toast, Sarah mumbled. 3 o'clock. James asked. Thompson nodded. And Dr. Anderson? The mother's lawyer called. She's requesting the first supervised visit next week. The pancake sat heavy in James's stomach. Sarah's hand tightened in his. Already, she's completed her first parenting class. It's her right under the agreement. I don't want to, Sarah whispered. 1 hour, Thompson said gently. In my office. Dr. Anderson can stay the whole time. Sarah looked at James. Promise. Wild horses. Remember. After Thompson left, Sarah pushed her plate away. Can we go to the hospital? The hospital? Why? I want to see where you found me. James studied her face. Are you sure? She nodded. The hospital entrance looked different in daylight. Sarah stood where James had found her that rainy night, her hand in his. I was so scared, she said quietly. But then you gave me your coat. I was scared too, James admitted. Scared for you. Did you know? That you'd keep me. Not then. But I knew I couldn't leave you alone. Nancy found them there, starting her shift. Everything okay? Just visiting, James said. Sarah hugged Nancy tight. Thank you for helping with my hair. And for the elephant. And for making Dad learn the right songs. Dad? Huh. Nancy grinned at James. Finally made it official. The paperwork's filed, James said. Should be finalized next month. Then we need to celebrate properly. Dinner at my house tonight. My girls have been dying to meet their new honorary cousin. Sarah bounced on her toes. Can we, Dad? The word still made his heart skip. What about Thompson's visit? After, Nancy said. 6 o'clock. No burning anything. Back home. Sarah went straight to Emma's, her room, pulling out her homework. James stood in the doorway, watching. The butterfly decals were gone now, replaced with posters of planets and animals. But Emma's science fair ribbon still hung on one wall, at Sarah's insistence. She would have liked you, James said softly. Sarah looked up. Emma. Yeah. Can you tell me about her? James sat on the edge of the bed. She loved science, always asking questions, doing experiments. She wanted to be a doctor, like me. What happened? Really? James took a deep breath. Brain tumor. We tried everything, but... He wiped his eyes. Sometimes even doctors can't fix things. Sarah moved to sit beside him. Is that why you work so hard? To fix other people? Maybe. But now I have something else to work for too. The doorbell rang, Thompson for the final inspection. Sarah squeezed James's hand before following him downstairs. Thompson was thorough but quick, checking every room, reviewing Sarah's school records, examining the well-stocked fridge, thanks to Nancy's shopping help. Well, he said finally, I think we're done here. Really? Sarah asked. Really? Thompson smiled, the first time James had seen him do so. You've got a good home, Sarah. A good father. After he left, Sarah hugged James so tight he could barely breathe. We did it, she whispered. We did. Can we get that dog now? James laughed. Still thinking about it. At Nancy's house that night, Sarah played with Nancy's daughters while the adults watched from the patio. The girls had immediately adopted Sarah as their new sister, teaching her hand games and sharing secrets. She's happy, Nancy said, watching them. You both ow. I never thought. James trailed off. After Emma, I didn't think I could. Be a father again. Yeah, well, you're doing pretty great at it. Nancy sipped her wine. Even if you can't cook. Or do hair. Hey, you're learning. Those braids yesterday were almost straight. Inside, Sarah's laugh mixed with the other girls' voices. She looked up, caught James watching, and waved. Dad, come play with us. Better go, Nancy grinned. Dad duties call. The game involved complicated clapping patterns that James couldn't quite master, making all the girls dissolve into giggles. Sarah's eyes shone with happiness, so different from the scared girl he'd found in the rain. Later, driving home, Sarah was quiet. You okay? James asked. Just thinking. About tomorrow? The visit with your mom. Sarah nodded. Will you really stay the whole time? The whole time? What if? She hesitated. What if she tries to take me again? She can't. You're my daughter now, legally and in every way that matters. But she's my mom. Yes, she is. And if you want to have a relationship with her, we'll figure that out. But your home is with me. Sarah was quiet for another moment. I like being Sarah Anderson. I like it too. At home, Sarah got ready for bed but paused in her doorway. Dad. Yeah. I love you. James felt his throat tighten. I love you too, sweetheart. After she was asleep, James sat in the living room, looking at photos. Emma's school picture. Sarah's first day at her new school. Both his daughters, though in different ways. His phone buzzed. Thompson. Final report filed. Congratulations, Dad. James smiled, looking at the latest addition to the wall. A photo from the diner that morning, Sarah laughing over chocolate chip pancakes, syrup on her chin, happiness radiating from her face. His daughter. Finally, officially, completely. And tomorrow they'd face whatever came together. 1 year later, Dad. The banner's crooked. James stepped back from the ladder, squinting at the happy 1 year banner he'd just hung. Sarah stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, looking so much like Nancy when she was being bossy that he had to laugh. It looks fine to me. Everything looks fine to you. Sarah rolled her eyes. Nancy's coming early to help set up. Right. Yes, and she's bringing the cake because apparently we can't be trusted with baking. Remember the cupcakes last month? That was one time. The fire department remembered us, Dad. It was true. The firefighters had taken one look at the address and said, Anderson residence? Cooking again. Sarah moved to adjust the banner herself, precise as always. She'd grown 2 inches in the past year, and her confidence had grown even more. The quiet, scared girl from the hospital entrance was now an 8-year-old who corrected her father's decorating skills and got straight A's in science. The doorbell rang. Nancy arriving with her daughters and enough food to feed an army. The guest of honor isn't supposed to help set up her own party, Nancy scolded, shooing Sarah away from the banner. Then why did Dad let me? Because your father still needs adult supervision. Nancy handed James a stack of plates. Put these out, and try not to break anything. The house filled quickly. Sarah's friends from school, teachers, hospital staff who'd watched their story unfold. Thompson arrived in a suit that still looked stiff, but he'd learned to smile more over the past year. The adoption papers came through, he asked James quietly. Last week. We're just waiting on the final court date. Good. Thompson watched Sarah showing her friends the new puppy. Yes, he'd finally given in 3 months ago. She's thriving. She is. The puppy, a rescue mutt named Einstein, barked at new arrivals. Sarah had kept her promise to walk him every day, though James usually joined them. Their evening walks had become a favorite time for talks about school, friends, and sometimes harder things. Like her monthly visits with Marie. The first visit had been tense, all 3 of them sitting stiffly in Thompson's office. But over time, they'd found a careful balance. Marie was doing better, steady job, therapy, parenting classes. She and Sarah had built a cautious relationship, different from before but healing in its own way. Dad, Sarah called from across the room. Nancy says it's cake time. The cake was perfect, chocolate with blue frosting, Sarah's favorites. As Nancy lit the candles, James thought about all the moments that had led here. The rainy night at the hospital, the pneumonia scare, the custody hearing, each step bringing them closer to family. Make a wish, he told Sarah. She closed her eyes, thought hard, then blew out the candles in one breath. Everyone cheered. What did you wish for? One of her friends asked. Can't tell, Sarah said, but I think it already came true anyway. Later, after Cake and Presents, Sarah sat with Nancy's daughters looking through a photo album, James and Sarah at the park, at her piano recital, building Einstein's doghouse, which had required 3 trips to the hardware store and some creative use of duct tape. Dr. Anderson. A new voice made him turn. Marie stood nearby, holding a small gift bag. Marie, I didn't know you were coming. Thompson said it would be okay. She shifted uncomfortably. I won't stay long. I wanted to give her this. Sarah had spotted her mother. She whispered something to her friends and came over. Hi, Mom. Hi, baby. Happy 1 year. Marie held out the bag. I found this in my old stuff. Thought you might want it. Sarah opened the bag and pulled out a worn teddy bear. Her eyes widened. Mr. Beans, I thought he was lost. You used to take him everywhere, Marie said softly. I found him when I was moving to the new apartment. Sarah hugged the bear, then, after a moment's hesitation, hugged Marie too. Thank you. You're happy here? Marie asked. Really happy? Yes. Sarah looked at James. I have a good dad. Marie nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, you do. After she left, Sarah took Mr. Beans upstairs to introduce him to Einstein. James started cleaning up paper plates, his heart full. You okay? Nancy appeared beside him with a trash bag. Yeah, just thinking about how much can change in a year. The party wound down as evening fell. Sarah's friends left with goodie bags. Thompson gave them both an actual smile, and Nancy promised to bring more leftovers tomorrow. Finally, it was just the three of them, James, Sarah, and Einstein curled up on the couch. Sarah had Mr. Beans in her lap, along with her favorite present, a real stethoscope from the hospital staff. Dad? Remember when you found me? In the rain? Of course. Were you scared? James thought about that night. Yes, but not of taking care of you. I was scared you wouldn't let me. Sarah leaned against him. I was scared too. But you gave me your coat. Best decision I ever made. Even better than letting me get Einstein. Way better. Einstein chews my shoes. Sarah giggled. He's just trying to improve your fashion sense. Nancy says you need help. Nancy talks too much. They sat in comfortable silence, Einstein snoring softly at their feet. Through the window, James could see stars appearing in the darkening sky. Dad? Yeah. I want to be a doctor too. Like you. James felt his chest tighten. Yeah. But I want to work with kids, so they don't have to be scared at hospitals. I think you'd be great at that. Sarah fiddled with the stethoscope. Do you think Emma would have been a good doctor too? The best. James kissed the top of her head. She would have been so proud to have you as a sister. Sarah yawned, snuggling closer. Can we have pancakes tomorrow? As long as you don't let me burn them. Deal. Soon, Sarah was asleep against him, Mr. Beans tucked under one arm, the stethoscope still clutched in her hand. James carefully lifted her, carrying her upstairs to bed just like he had that first night. In her room, the walls now covered with medical posters alongside the animal ones, he tucked her in. Einstein followed, settling at the foot of her bed, his usual spot. Love you, Dad, Sarah mumbled, half asleep. Love you too, sweetheart. Downstairs, James added a new photo to the wall, Sarah blowing out her candles, surrounded by friends and family, her face glowing with joy. Next to it hung the official adoption certificate, finally making legal what their hearts had known for months. They were father and daughter, bound not by blood but by choice, by love, by promises kept. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. But this time, no one was alone in the storm.